The year is 1999, and you're up late on the family computer. Silent Hill has just been released for the PlayStation 1. The Y2K crisis looms on the horizon, and a dark secret is hiding inside an obscure piece of software. A seemingly innocuous screensaver that nevertheless captures the minds of thousands as they peer into their CRT screens, watching unblinkingly as its sinister story unfolds on the other side. This is a tale of conspiracy, of mistreatment, of cover-ups and speculation, obsession and delusion, about the virtual becoming real and the real becoming virtual. This is the story of 3D Workers Island.
Shadow Man, Shadow Man, you've given up the ghost, given up the ghost. Disembodied voice, drifting into eternity, lost within the mist inside the void.
The mystery of 3D Workers Island first appeared in October of 2024 as a series of images released to an itch.io page by someone called Mr. Yes. That name may be familiar to some of you. The user behind this is known in other areas of the internet as Pressed Yes or Tony Domenico. Back in 2017, Domenico began what would become one of the most influential and lasting internet mysteries of all time, Petscop. Petscop ended in November of 2019, half a decade ago, and with such a massive impact, considered by many to be the greatest example of digital unfiction ever created, internet users held their breath for whatever project Domenico would follow up with. That project ended up being 3D Workers Island, more than 4 years after Petscop ended. 3D Workers Island is considerably smaller in scope, but no less compelling, mysterious, and captivating. So let's dive right in. This story begins on Internet Explorer, a website called the 3dwi.scr discovery pages. This What is 3dwi.scr page contains a lot of information, context for the software this story is centered around. Additionally, we'll soon realize that the website itself, dedicated to said software, is just as important to that story. 3dwi.scr is a freeware screensaver. The full title is 3D Workers Island, but most of us prefer to use its file name instead, pronounced 3D Whisker. In 3D Workers Island, 6 characters interact on a tiny island, with complex and unpredictable results. The original source of the program is unknown. It was discovered at 3D Screensaver's Palace. We recommend trying 3D Whisker yourself by downloading it from the download page. The events that occur in 3D Whisker are not scripted. They unfold dynamically, and every session is different. If you discover anything interesting or important that has not been recorded here or discussed on the forum, feel free to send us an email, or create a thread on the forum asking about it. But please do not treat this as a place for tall tales. This bit about tall tales is definitely worth noting. The discovery pages are clearly very thorough, with pages for everything from each individual character seen in the screensaver, objects, the AI system, mysteries, and more. Clearly, the community around this is pretty dedicated. At the bottom of the page, we see that the individuals behind this site go by Pat Lawler, or P. Lawler, who seems to have conceived of the site, and Singer, who runs the technical upkeep. So what is so special about this screensaver that would lead someone to create a whole website dedicated to it? Moving to the downloads page, we go through the process of installing all 4.22 megabytes of 3D Whisker, following the instructions left by its unknown creator. The README provided is helpful for setting up the program itself, but is fairly vague on the technical details. Workers are an approach to computation. 3D Workers Island takes advantage of resources in the world. Welcome to the world in the computer. Going to our computer properties and navigating to the screensaver section, we run 3D Workers Island. At the start, we're introduced to the 6 characters who inhabit this world. Pat, Rebecca, Joe, Amber, Holland, and Grace. Blank, faceless people reminiscent of Lego minifigures. Pat, Rebecca, and Joe appear to be adults, while Amber, Holland, and Grace seem to be in varying stages of childhood. After that, we see the island. A red, windowless house at one end, a beach with a picnic table at the other. Our first character emerges from the front door, Joe, and he goes about watering the plants, with Amber close behind him. And then we're hit with our first title card. There are a few of these throughout the story, which seem to signify a new chapter. This one simply reads, World. Moving back to the website, we find ourselves surfing the discovery boards, aka the 3D Whisker forums. Specifically, a thread asking what's been happening on everyone's island for today, from a new user. The timestamp at the top right helps us place the story in a bit more context, giving us the date of April 1999. Assuming this is a fairly recent post, it seems to place our story within a few days difference of April 25th, 99. Most of the users here are absolutely mesmerized by the screensaver, completely obsessed. One even says they put it on for their mother, who otherwise hates TV but will watch the virtual people quietly for hours. These descriptions border the line from genuine interest to odd obsession, but not everyone is so bought in. When one user, Earl Egger, writes, "It's boring. I don't get it. The people are standing around, sitting around, looking around, walking around. They don't have faces, so I don't know what they're feeling or thinking. I don't know. What's going on here, guys?" P. Lawler, the site's creator, responds, "Which characters are you talking about? You know, some people have worked hard enough in their lives and deserve a rest already. No, but seriously, what do you mean? I see plenty of activity on the island. I do feel a twinge of annoyance when I see a character like Amber sitting around. I want to tell her, hey, you're young. Do something." Meanwhile, other users explain some interesting things they've seen, like Holland just put her face inside a tree. The other day, I saw Joe take a remote-controlled helicopter out of the house and fly it around. I'd never seen that before. Then, a user named Ned Hucker says something a little odd. Actually, it does become more entertaining over time. You just have to keep watching. I think you'll be surprised by what you see, but you do have to be kind of open to it. You have to be cool. Be cool and things will be shown to you. Personally, I love this screensaver. It's so fucked up. Not only is this sort of esoteric, be cool and things will be shown to you, man, attitude a little strange, there's something even stranger about his last comment, about the screensaver being fucked up. It appeared fairly innocent up till now. Between these conversations, we see more scenes from the island. A barbecue, with Rebecca heading the grill. All the characters are out and about, seemingly chatting and interacting, with the exception of Grace, who stands alone, facing the water. We close in on Pat, Holland, Amber, and Grace standing on the beach. Rebecca comes by, giving a hamburger to Holland while she lays in the sand. Next, we head to the earliest known source of 3D Whisker, according to the discovery pages, 3D Screensaver's Palace. Among the listings of screen shapes in 3D Cave 2 with detailed descriptions as to their contents, we find 3D Workers Island, with a noticeably sparse description, an island with people walking around on it. Amber mows the lawn around the house, while Rebecca sits at a picnic table. P. Lawler would probably be happy to hear Amber's doing something more active. Scrolling through more of the discovery pages, we read through an overview page, which gives us some interesting insight into just how little the mechanics of the 3D Whisker program are understood. It is clear from simple observation that this tech should not be taken lightly, but just how advanced this AI is seems to be an ambiguous and controversial question in the community. It is very much a matter of intuition at this point. At the very least, it is good enough to capture the imaginations of many. So exactly how this program functions, and notably what it and its characters are actually capable of, is a mystery. We also get some interesting insight into P. Lawler's relationship with the screensaver. Since retiring last November, I have been keeping 3D Whisker running on the desk in my study, in my bedroom, my living room, my kitchen, and my basement, all running around the clock as I do my household tasks and live my life. What I see on each of these PCs throughout the day is still continuously fresh and novel to me. It makes my home into a very pleasant little world. You will notice that the island is quiet. 3D Whisker does not play audio. The significance of this silence is considerable. It allows the island to disappear. Despite its heft, it's also light. There is a sense of ghostly transience, that none of it is really happening, and it can all vanish with the flick of a mouse. It seems that those who use this screensaver treat it with a real sense of reverence. P. Lawler even more so than most, running it on as many screens as she can and clearly interested enough to head an entire community dedicated to it. This fascination with 3D Whisker feels like it's moved well out of the realm of a simple hobby and evidently means a whole lot to these users. Back on the island, we see Amber and Holland sitting across from each other on the beach, interacting in some way. Amber reaches out and Holland suddenly gets up and runs back into the house. Amber sits alone. Over on the discovery boards, user Frank Arper posts about a school project he helped his son complete, some kind of diorama of the island from 3D Whisker. Though most of the reactions are positive, P. Lawler chimes in with a little parenting advice. You did a good job with the island. I have some advice. You should not do your son's work for him. Do not let him get used to the idea that you will do his assignments. Take it from a fellow parent. Frank responds, thanks, appreciated, but they were expecting the parents to help with this one. Further in the thread, the conversation changes to some kids being afraid of the screensaver, and a user named Johnson tells a noteworthy story. Kids are afraid of everything. My wife and I rented a tape of The Page Master to watch with her niece, and unfortunately we got to the moment where Macaulay Culkin's in the library and gets overtaken and drowned in rivers of pain, and suddenly the tape went nuts and became unreadable. Her niece started screaming. Now she's afraid of getting drowned in paint and turning into a cartoon. I don't blame the people who made that movie for making a terrified Macaulay Culkin character get drowned in paint, but some kids really do think it's possible to get swallowed up into a cartoon prison where they can't escape. And hell, if I believe that, I'd be afraid too. For those unfamiliar, the scene Johnson is describing isn't just where Macaulay Culkin's character gets turned into a cartoon, but is fully transported into a cartoon world. A world of literary characters. A world of fantasy, imagination, and fiction. A cartoon prison is kind of an apt description, worth keeping in mind. On the island, we see a small corner of the house. Barely visible behind the wall, Amber and Pat come into view. There's some kind of movement, and Amber drops to the ground. Pat leers down, standing above her. Our next thread on the forums is interesting. Right off the bat, we see this was posted by a now banned user named Good Kid, who only made around 9 posts. According to his post signature, he's just a 14-year-old teenage kid who doesn't know anything. He tells the board about how he was sent to detention and convinced the computer lab teacher to install 3D Workers Island on all the school computers. We turned off all the lights and started it going on every computer in the room. It was a powerful experience. Just all these different things happening on the island all around us, on glowing screens, in the dark and silent computer lab at night. It felt like this is the way 3DWI was meant to be experienced. I recommend putting this thing on as many screens as you possibly can. Again, we find the users on this site to be quite enamored. When Joycey asks why he was sent to detention, his answer is really odd. I also invented a fake skin disease called cutillicune and started incorporating it into some of my written assignments in English and history. Here's how he describes it. Cutillicune. Skin disease with 4 stages. Stage 0, redness and sensitivity. Stage 1, skin gaps, holes or gaps of various sizes, exposing dermis. Stage 2, skin islands. Widespread loss of epidermis, leaving only a number of skin islands of various sizes. Stage 3, recession of the islands, leading to complete loss of epidermis. Early stages can be treated and reversed, but stage 3 is irreversible. Stages 1, 2, and 3 are consistently rated 10 on the 1 to 10 pain scale. Screaming and hair pulling and despair. Dark. Shifting our attention to the screensaver, Holland and Pat stand in the grass as Amber comes around the side of the house, pushing a wheelbarrow full of red balls, resembling apples. Amber brings it to the beach and leaves it there. Seems like Amber is busy with a lot of chores. Joycey starts a thread over on the boards. Who's your favorite character? The reaction from the community is a little jarring. Amber. No question, Amber. Amber's the answer. If I had to choose a favorite, tough one. JK, it's Amber. Fuck everyone else. I'm offended that the question is even being posed, but I understand you don't know any better. You're better off this way. I know we're not supposed to talk about those topics here, but we can at least be honest when it comes to questions like this. I'm not gonna pretend my favorite character is Holland or Grace or somebody else just so things stay clean on this forum. So what's up? An inside joke? Something we haven't yet seen on the screensaver itself? We're not the only ones in the dark. User Buddy responds, "Can somebody fill me in on the joke here? What's wrong with the other characters?" P. Lawler answers too. Amber would be a good choice and may have been mine, but I'm sometimes put off by her lazy tendencies. Naturally, I would choose Pat, since by coincidence we share a name, and I believe the 2 children are hers, another coincidence as I also have 2 daughters. However, I cannot help but feel attracted to Rebecca, with her eye-catching red hair and shoes. It is a difficult question. Interesting. Meanwhile, Grace, Amber, and Holland stand on the island, our point of view zoomed way out. Amber approaches Holland by the beach, but Holland runs off back into the house yet again. After a moment, Amber sits down and raises her hands into the air, moving from side to side. It almost looks like crying. We move away from 3dwhisker.com for now, instead finding ourselves on a GeoCities site called Computer Philosophy Part 1, Windows. The writing on this page is odd. Hard to parse. There are of windows everywhere we see them, and anyone could be looking in at you. That's part of what makes them scary. But windows are even scarier when you're the one who looks in them, because of when you never know what you'll see in them. Remember the enthusiasm in a market for Windows into Reality in 1996 as the Nintendo 64 broke once lore Project Reality. Of course, the TV screen is really a window into fiction and not reality. The only real window of reality is the one we looked into as a baby and still cannot turn from. What called the common story theme of falling into asphalt imagery, we bring the inside into the outside, and the outside is the place we are stuck looking. This is the only meaning of I'm trapped in the TV, when we find out that reality is the thing we look into. But what does that mean? Where are we? What happens when something bad you find responsible for is there, and you do nothing to stop it, because it looks through a window and is not real? I'm trapped in here, and I may never return home. What do we mean?
Gonna be honest, I have no idea what you mean, big dog.
At the bottom of the page, we see 3 renders of a computer monitor. 2 pieces of simple geometry are displayed on them, a green cone and a red sphere. They first appear flat on the screen, then as if they have depth within the monitor, and finally the objects move out of the screen, sitting beside it. This whole web page oozes that signature unusual Domenico dialogue style. We'll come back to this section with a closer look later, but for now, I think it's clear that this isn't just random nonsense. These themes of peering into a different reality and the blurring of our perceptions feels very much in line with other concepts this story has brought up explicitly. The Page Master and the obsession with watching the world of 3D Workers Island itself. After we finished reading, we're hit with another title card, Island. We're looking at a conversation between Edward Sucks Zero and Miss Toothpaste on AOL Instant Messenger. Miss Toothpaste describes a conversation she had with her cousin this past Thanksgiving. It got late, and he took me down a dark trail and scared the piss out of me talking about ghosts and murderers. In a quiet moment, I thought I might change the subject, so I started talking about 3DWI apropos of nothing. Turns out he knew about it, which caught me off guard. And he carried on with the exact same tone as when he was talking about torture killers a moment earlier, but now talking about 3DWI. As if telling me about a conspiracy or something, he went on about the girl in the pink shirt and gave me this long list of ominous things to pay attention to in the screensaver. Edward replies with some interesting information, something that starts to contextualize some of the confusing messages on the discovery boards. Oh, he's one of the Amber shitheads. Those people basically took down that old Discovery Pages website a couple years ago. Ruined a good thing. Odd. Miss Toothpaste continues her story. Anyway, when we got back, we watched 3DWI together until 2 a.m. on the slowest, crappiest computer in the world. We watched until suddenly the computer froze completely, but he told me it wasn't really frozen, that actually 3DWI does that on purpose to hide things that are happening. I don't know. He was making things up on the spot, but I think they still meant something to him. On the boards, user Buddy, who we saw earlier appear to be out of the loop on this whole Amber thing, finally breaks the ice on this odd, unspoken subject we're not supposed to talk about. I almost don't want to ask this at all, but I've been hearing certain implications about this screensaver that I don't want to repeat here, but you probably know what I'm talking about. I think maybe it's supposed to be a joke, but if so, I don't find it funny at all. Can somebody give me some more info about this? And again, the reaction is kind of surprising. Turn back now. Don't go any further. Stop. For your own peace of mind, stop this line of inquiry now and do something else. Don't become another one of us freaks. User Cheer posts a link which has since been removed by P. Lawler. I'm no coward. Here's the link. Go ahead. Enjoy. Yeah, that's not gonna last very long. On the island, things are getting a little stranger. Joe sits on a chair, either hovering over the water or impossibly held up by one of its legs at the very edge of the island, as Grace stands facing him. Holland walks out of the house, holding a floor lamp above her head. What is going on here? In the meantime, we seem to have found that removed link, and now sit in front of a website called Inside 3D Whisker. A dark image of the house from the island heads the page with the following text below. This bit is a little long, but I'm going to read it in its entirety because it is filled with relevant information and characterization. The windows of my living room, covering the walls with wide views of my front and backyards, fill the room with light during the day and an air of vulnerability during the night. My brother crashes here. He sleeps on the couch against the back windows. Sometimes we sit together, looking out those windows, and tell stories about the house beyond my backyard. A man lives in that house with his 2 sons. The curtains are closed, and we imagine our own childhood replaying itself behind them. It's just a stupid game, really, making up stories about the neighbor. I think of it as a way to bond over past experiences. Somehow, we get emotional about it anyway, but not emotional enough to do anything, because of course, it's a stupid game. There's no point in worrying about those children based on feelings and intuition alone. Still, we both find that our dreams become more vivid with time. Lately, we've grown exhausted of that game, but recently I downloaded 3D Workers Island. It plays on a PC in the corner of my living room. You should check out this program. It's a screensaver, which means it only starts when you aren't using your computer. But when it starts, you're on an island. There are people around, but they don't do much. Not when they're outside, anyway. Naturally, you wonder what they might be doing inside the windowless red house in the background. That's when things start to go wrong. When you start wondering that. And now we begin another game. As in life, concern begets more concern. The reality is always worse than you think it is. No matter how much you learn, it's always worse. And the only escape is to stop asking, to stop digging, to stop learning. This is your chance to stop. The preferred resource for all things 3D Workers Island is called 3D Whisker Discovery Pages. Created and maintained by Pat Lawler, it covers everything a reasonable person would want to know. You should browse her website first if you haven't already, because it's quite good, but Pat Lawler doesn't see what we see, or chooses not to. I've created a different kind of resource. Here, I take your sightings and I display them for the benefit of others. Together we play this game the way it's meant to be played. Welcome to my website, Inside 3D Whisker. Beyond here are themes of violent abuse and torture. Continue if you can handle that. Things just got dark really fast. What lies in wait for us? Joe, Holland, and Amber sit at a picnic table. Amber and Holland face away from each other, and nobody moves. Eventually, Joe stands and begins tending to the plants. Holland and Amber don't react. P. Lawler is back on the discovery boards, explaining why she removed Cheer's link. I removed your link because it breaks the following rule. Rule 5. Do not post links to the website. You know the one. It is nothing more than a collection of perverted creative writing prompts. I would not usually be so strict about something like this, but clearly there are too many here who cannot stay reasonable and sane while discussing the contents of this particular website, so I must make the hard decision of banning it. You can guess what I think about this topic, but let me try to explain the phenomenon occurring here. The fact is, many internet users are children and young adults, and children like to play games. What this means is, you occasionally find yourself unknowingly pulled into the games played by children. On the website, you will primarily find stories told by kids to scare other kids. You will also find so-called analysis of these stories that treats them as true fact to give them legitimacy, but there is no evidence to be found here. I hope I have cleared things up for you, buddy.
Okay, so with everything we've gathered so far, it appears that there are really 2 distinct communities within the 3D Whisker fandom. One which appreciates the screensaver as an entertaining and intriguing piece of technology and dynamic storytelling, and one which seems to see something deeper, darker within it. Both are absolutely captivated by it, but the ones who believe that something darker is going on are kind of like the black sheep of the community, and view themselves as having gone too far down the rabbit hole, unable to return to the cheerier world the rest of the community is in. And the admins of the more mainstream site, specifically P. Lawler, seem pretty determined to keep this side of the community under wraps, apparently having caused them to branch off into their own website.
Undeterred, Cheer continues to provide information. Shut up, Pat. Anyway, more links. One links to an AOL member page for someone called John Sorroway, and another to a GeoCities site called Welcome to My World. Good info about John Sorroway. Stories of reality. Clearly, there's a lot more to this side of the screensaver than we have even scratched the surface of. Further along the thread, Singer, the other admin, responds. Thank you, P. Lawler. Well said. Those violent stories are cheesy and over the top. Blood and guts. Believe me, I've been watching this program for so long, I would have seen such things by now. Cheer retorts, if the screensaver won't open up to you, maybe you need to look within yourself to find the problem. As does user Sax Player. You'd love to think it's all just bloody screaming children. Long before I began seeing the violent shit, I saw the way Amber was treated by the other Islanders. I saw her tiredness. I saw her subtle messages. But you just point at the bleeding children and laugh. Alright then. This division within the community continues. HTL Maniac asks, why is it always Amber who gets abused and killed in these made-up scenarios? Don't get why this community has an obsession with torturing her specifically. You're all freaks and sociopaths is my best guess. P. Lawler replies again, using a graphic from Snopes to make her point about the stories this darker side seems to perpetuate. I would give every one of these stories the red sphere of falseness. False, false, false. Finally, user 12 Point seems to have gotten to the site before the link was removed. Jesus fucking Christ, that website. The screenshots and pictures on there are insane. Some of them are obviously straight out of Photoshop. Others, I don't know. They're all low quality JPEGs for what it's worth. Makes it easy to hide flaws. On the island, we see Holland walking aimlessly into a wall. As this story goes on, I feel like the things we're seeing are becoming stranger, like the program is breaking down a bit. We started with pretty straightforward scenes like barbecues and mowing the lawn, but now it's floating furniture, things behind the house, and now this. And though we haven't seen anything quite as intense as bleeding, screaming children, the implications of some of these character interactions have had a concerning undertone, and they're right, it usually centers around Amber. I think, despite the user warnings, we have to look deeper. We have to see what's being hidden from us. We're back on that redacted site, now on a more traditional homepage. It looks very similar to 3dwhisker.com, but with a darker theme. Welcome to Inside 3D Whisker. Here you'll find the content missing from P. Lawler's 3D Whisker discovery pages. Her website should be your source of general information about the screensaver, but come back here when you're done. Pick a category on the left and browse our collection of user-submitted sightings. Download 3D Whisker and let us know what you find by submitting a sighting. Thanks for visiting and telling us your stories. The tabs on the side are decidedly more unsettling than those on the discovery pages. Hidden messages, photographs, screams, whispers. What have we just gotten ourselves into? Scrolling through the recent updates, there's a lot of information we have little to no context around. Amber's rare black shirt, which may or may not display a photo of a real-life person named Sam Ferrero. Terms like worker degeneration, the PJR pin, Grace's guilt, strange faces and sounds, despite the screensaver supposedly containing no audio. This site seems to act as a kind of hub for the investigations into the dark secrets, rare happenings, and seemingly paranormal events they claim lie within the screensaver. I can't believe people are walking to the bathroom at night and seeing these things. Interestingly, these theories and stories often bring in people from the real world, in the universe of the story. John Sarway, Sam Ferrero, and maybe even P. Lawler? One quote we see without much context reads, "Lucky for that girl, her story became an urban legend. Most people don't even believe it really happened, even if they are fascinated anyway. A perfect disappearing act, the real transforming into fiction. Now she lives her disgraceful retirement in the remote world of a cartoon, but reality will haunt her conscience forever." The connection to P. Lawler's mention of a retirement feels in some way intentional, especially as we continue to see a disdain for her from this side of the community. We also see this thematic continuation of a merging of reality and fiction. At the bottom of the page, there's a more personal update from whoever it is that runs this site. Falling behind on emails. Sorry everybody, but pray for my brother because he's been having a hard time lately. He's in the hospital now. Sometimes you've been broken in ways that don't hit you until decades later. I expect my turn to come soon. When that day comes, my brother will be alive to support me. But for now, let's go.
It's important to touch on the characterization of this person so far. There's a pretty direct parallel between their anecdote of making up stories about their neighbor's house and 3D Whisker, windowless house and all. And clearly this person and their brother are going through challenging times. It feels like the people who have become most enthralled by 3D Whisker are led there because of significant personal circumstance, whether that be retirement, health issues, or anything else. Worth keeping in mind.
On the island, the anomalies continue. Pat and Rebecca appear to be glitching out, merging through each other as Amber sits at the picnic table. They seem to follow each other, flailing their limbs as they fuse in and out. Looking deeper into some of the oddities inside 3D Whisker describes, we begin reading about something called the PJR pin. This describes a rare sighting in which all of the adult characters on the island, Pat, Joe, and Rebecca, aka PJR, surround Amber in a close enough formation that she is unable to move. Supposedly, this event causes the following. 1. All 4 characters disappear instantaneously. 2. The world is replaced with darkness. In that darkness appears a photograph of a child in clothes that resemble Amber's pink stripes. She is sometimes injured, sometimes not. An audio clip of a young woman screams or multiple screams play from the speakers. It's usually interpreted as Amber's voice, but sometimes as the voice of an off-camera witness. 5. The world reappears. Pat, Joe, Rebecca, and Amber reappear at the front door of the house one by one. Amber is the last to appear. No evidence of the event remains. Most accounts miss the first 3 steps in the sequence. It's only when they hear the screams that they start paying attention to what's happening on the screen. Further into the article, there are descriptions of similar events. Screams, whispers, real-world photos of bodies, often interpreted as Amber, varying from healthy to dead and emaciated. In this case, even when Amber doesn't display any physical injuries, her transformation into a human body is often interpreted as an act of violence itself. In general, any movement between fiction and reality in either direction is treated with an undertone of terror. Who is the girl in the picture? Until we have a legitimate screenshot, we have little to go on, and this one has proved challenging to capture. Users submit their own experiences, claiming to hear screams and see the photos for themselves. Ominously, the final story, from Harold, cuts off before we can read his entire description, and the image was a tasteless display of... On the island, we see a formation of characters. It's reminiscent of the PJR pin, seeing the characters huddled together, but Amber is nowhere to be seen, and nobody is stuck in the middle. The lawnmower sits unattended, along with the laptop on the picnic table. Back to the discovery boards, the division is heating up. User Reality Priest says, "It's getting worse and worse. The more I watch, the more I notice, the more I understand, the more bold it becomes with the things it shows me. Every time I come to some new revelation, the screensaver shows me more. But most other people don't see these things, and if I have someone in the room with me, they don't happen." HTML Maniac responds, "Are you telling me P. Lawler, with the 10 billion hours she's been watching 3DWI, hasn't seen any of these things?" Chris chimes in, "Getting dangerous in here, LOL." And then, a surprising character makes a return. Good Kid. Pat Lawler is a criminal. I have family who used to live down the street from her. Nobody in their right mind would trust Pat Lawler. Pat Lawler shouldn't be allowed to run a 3D Workers Island fan website. She should be in prison. Anyone who wants details is free to message me. I'm GoodKid85 on AIM. Clearly, this is why he was banned. Damn it, Good Kid! P. Lawler is always online. She reads every post the second you submit it. You cannot evade her. And then we see something strange. Pat, the 3D Whisker character, on the island, using the computer. And then, after a moment, she disappears behind the house. This connection between P. Lawler Pat and the 3D Whisker Pat feels maybe more concrete than I assumed. The screensaver iris wipes to an image of a star emblem with the Earth inside it. It flips, showing the house's door on the other side, then flips back. What is going on here? Before we can dive too much further, we're back on Inside 3D Whisker. Worker degeneration is, according to this site, one of the most well-documented sightings. Described as akin to injury or damage, the term's origin is unknown, as it never came from the 3D Whisker creators officially, but it implies a bit of knowledge about the screensaver's internals, that the injury is associated in some fundamental way with the underlying worker concept. This event seems to only affect Amber. It begins with Amber changing to an entirely red hue, showcased in this characteristically low-quality screenshot. After this stage is compression, in which the worker shrinks into a red sphere, which look familiar. They appear identical to the apples we saw in Amber's wheelbarrow before. Maybe that imagery was a bit more morbid than we initially thought. This red ball is seemingly inert. It doesn't move or interact with anything. But yes, the red ball is Amber. The article continues to explain that, again, this state is interpreted as some kind of harm, mutilation, or malnutrition, and has become associated with small, muffled screaming. Oddly, Amber can be seen coming back out of the house after this occurs, respawning, despite the red ball still being present. Eventually, the ball will shrink into non-existence, and the screams will fade. Testimonies from other users are again provided at the bottom of the page, and they're pretty unnerving. Letting the screensaver go longer periods has unlocked something, and now I'm seeing all sorts of funny shit like a red Amber. She goes in the house, comes out redder. Goes behind the house, comes back redder again, comes back weird and slow. Crawls around until pop. She's just a ball on the ground that everyone ignores, and that's that. I went away for 8 hours, and when I got back, there's a bunch of red spheres scattered around and making noise. Altogether, it sounded like a chorus of dissonant humming. Now I'm wondering just how long my dog had to listen to that shit. How many of them are sitting at the bottom of the ocean? I just can't help but feel hopeless about everything. Nobody will ever help me, and I'll never help myself. I'm too afraid to reach out. I'm not even writing this right now. This message exists only in my head. This whole website exists only in my head. 3D Workers Island? What is this? Would I really put this online? Would I really give anyone the slightest glimpse into my world? This is fake. This is all fake, and nobody will ever see it. The author of the article responds to this last one. To Thomas, I hear you, and I understand. Suffering in silence is such hard work.
Setting aside the distressing implications of this worker degeneration event, this final testimony from Thomas seems to really reinforce some of these issues we've been seeing. The rabbit hole these users fall into, how much the screensaver seems to affect them, and perhaps the pre-existing personal or mental health issues that seem to surround the individuals who find themselves drawn to 3D Whisker. How much of what Thomas is saying is informed by the screensaver, and how much is his own experience which he's entangled with his perception of the screensaver. This idea is one we will most definitely return to, as well as the continuation of Windows and reality, which it seems to touch on as well, but for now, we have more to see on the island.
Grace stands alone on the beach, naturally facing away from the camera. She stares out at the ocean, and then we iris wipe to another intermission. Multicolored droplets fall to the ground, and then there's another title card. Decidedly the most ominous of them all. Recession of the Islands.
Clearly a reference to Good Kid's fake degenerative skin condition, which looking at it now seems like a clear parallel in some way to the worker degeneration concept. Either way, this is the final chapter of the story, and is by far the shortest.
We see a close-up on the beach of the island. The wheelbarrow is empty, the red balls now floating in the ocean. Slowly, they sink below the surface until they disappear completely. How many of them are sitting at the bottom of the ocean? We zoom out, farther and farther, until the island is only a speck. Then even further, a grid of different screens all running simultaneously, and then pure red. And that was 3D Workers Island.
What's that? Ahoy! I've been stranded on this island for days. If you enjoy these videos and you'd like to support me, consider joining my Patreon. Starting at only $2, you get all the content, behind the scenes, early access, exclusive reviews and videos, commentary tracks, and more. For $5, you get to ask questions on my commentary tracks and semi-monthly Q&As. And as a bonus, all the music I make for these videos are available to download there for free. You don't even have to become a member. So consider giving the Patreon a look. Now, you gonna let me on the boat or what? No, where are you going? And hello?
In order to fully unravel the mysteries within 3D Workers Island, we'll first need to wind the threads back together, get some clarity by looking at the bigger picture, and examine what we are most sure of, before we can get into more wild speculation. First and foremost, I want to infer a perspective for the story. It seems, at least in part, to be a narrative told from the first-person perspective. The reader inhabits the viewpoint of someone using their computer sometime around April of 1999.
Though there are brief steps away, such as the AIM conversation, which could be pulled from somewhere else, for the most part, we follow someone who discovers the 3D Workers Island screensaver, installs it, and between periods of watching the island run, falls down the rabbit hole of its community. And the interactions and information we witness within this community are by far the most important elements to the story, more so than even the screensaver itself, of which the inner workings and origins remain mysterious. Since we know so little about it concretely, let's shift our attention to the program itself briefly.
The creator or creators of 3D Whisker are complete unknowns, with its earliest appearance being a sparsely detailed entry on a screensaver aggregate site uploaded in late 1997. Though the dynamic interactions and worker AI are clearly quite impressive, it's not a particularly large file, with a similar 3D screensaver like 3D Cave 2 being more than double its size. Its README also reveals very little about its inner workings, other than that the workers are an approach to computation. All we really know about its history is that it was created sometime during or prior to 1997 by someone or someones with the computer skills to pull something as dynamic as this off. Whether this obscurity around its origins and functions was intentional or not remains to be seen, but the screensaver itself was clearly always meant to be public and widely distributed. If you enjoyed 3D Workers Island, please spread the word online.
Functionally, it's a screensaver that works as a sort of character interaction simulator, with seemingly dozens to hundreds of different unique predetermined behaviors like flying a remote helicopter or mowing the lawn, integrated with dynamic character interactions, objects, and events, like the barbecue. The characters' story, relationships, and personalities are incredibly vague. Some characters could be related, for instance Pat and Holland's similar appearances, but it's never made clear. They are blank, faceless canvases, which we are only ever really able to infer or imagine a context around.
Due to its small file size, it's hard to imagine that it could fit much more than that, let alone different sound files and real-life photographs, which, if the stories are to be believed, may lead us to think there's a more supernatural element at play. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
After 3D Whisker's appearance on the wider web, a community started building around it. The growth and early days of this community are also relatively unknown, but it seems safe to say it's remained rather niche, as some users are surprised when people they meet in real life have heard of it. This community has seemingly coalesced around the 3D Whisker discovery pages and boards as its main hub. This hub is run by our first major player in the story, Pat Lawler, a retired mother who has come to love the screensaver and put together the website along with Singer, the other admin who takes care of the technical side. Pat seems to specifically feel a strong connection to the Pat on the island, interpreting Holland and Amber as the character's children and comparing them to her own two kids.
P. Lawler, Singer, and others on the board make up one half of the community, individuals who are just as seemingly obsessed as anyone else with the software, but tend to believe it's just that. An impressive but ultimately benign computer program. The other side of the community is seemingly headed by whoever it is that runs the unofficial sister site to the discovery pages, Inside 3D Whisker.
This side of the community, which includes discovery boards users like Cheer, Sax Player, Ned Hucker, and Reality Priest, claims to see something more disturbing, perhaps even supernatural going on. That if you look for long enough and open yourself up to it, the real story within the screensaver will reveal itself, something revolving around Amber. Images and sounds of real people, rare encounters and sightings of odd behavior, which seems to imply that Amber is a victim of abuse at the hands of the other islanders. These two factions of the 3D Whisker community clash throughout the story until the very end. The user Good Kid, who joined the forum semi-recently, appears at first to just be a troublemaking teenager who happens to like the screensaver like everyone else. But his final message before being banned implies he knows more than he lets on, and that he may have had other intentions for joining. He accuses Pat Lawler of some kind of grievous crime and says that she should be in prison, but he doesn't expand further before being banned from the boards. With this information, we get the impression that Pat is hiding something, that maybe she doesn't really believe that all these disturbing stories are false, and is instead just trying to convince us that she is somehow involved in this darker side. But unfortunately, that is where these characters' interactions seem to end.
Which takes us to what is going on within the screensaver itself. what we see occur in conjunction with the stories and context from the other users. Though we never see these disturbing photos firsthand, the implications of some of the scenes we witness seem to corroborate the narrative of Amber's abuse.
If we take into account Pat and Holland's similar appearance and Pat, Holland, and Amber's seemingly close interactions, it's not a stretch to come to the same conclusion as P. Lawler, that Pat is Holland and Amber's mother. Though fairly innocuous at first, the implied narrative we see becomes darker as time goes on. Amber being constantly rejected by Holland, seemingly even crying at one point. What appears to be Pat physically punishing Amber behind the house, and Amber being the only child who does any kind of physical chores or labor around the entire island. Whether or not all the other adults on the island actively participate in this mistreatment is unclear, but at the very least they do nothing to stop it. Joe sits awkwardly with Amber and Holland but never steps in, instead seemingly ignoring it. Grace, a teenager without the same authority as the adults, can only sit dejectedly, not wanting to participate with the adults, stewing in the guilt of her own inaction. Even with just what we see firsthand, the narrative becomes clear. Amber is suffering abuse at the hands of her parental figure. She's an outcast, with nobody else on the island who looks like her, and anyone with the power to help her either can't or won't. Forced to witness things she shouldn't have to see, endure and bear the mistreatment, punishments, and physical labor alone. And this is all without discussing the much darker side we don't see firsthand, but seems to match up with this interpretation.
If we're to believe even a fraction of the information found on Inside 3D Whisker, the implications become even more disturbing, the level of mistreatment worse than one would ever want to imagine.
Amber is subject to more than just chores and reprimands. Physical degeneration, something which is interpreted as an act of violent torture or suffering, screams of pain, states of starvation, mutilation, and trauma, and then there's the implications of the photographs, real-life photographs. Taking into account the recurring themes of a merging of realities, we have to come to the conclusion that Amber is, in some way, a real person. But how?
Is she a ghost who haunts this program, reliving the traumas which eventually led to her death? A virtual AI which became advanced and distressed enough to somehow begin reaching into reality? This is where our characters in real life come into play. We know that the Inside 3D Whisker community regularly entertain the idea that real people are involved in this mystery somehow. John Sorroway, Sam Ferrero, and maybe even Pat Lawler. Good Kid's accusation, along with her own stated correlation to the characters in the game, even a direct visual parallel with Pat on the computer after Good Kid was banned. We don't know who made 3D Workers Island, and we don't know why. But we do know this.
Pat Lawler has been accused of doing something terrible. Pat Lawler and her children seem to have a direct parallel to the characters in the Screensaver, with the Pat on the island seemingly abusing one of her own children. Pat Lawler expresses a kind of distaste for Amber's lazy tendencies and wants to silence anyone from discussing the possibility that something darker is going on. Pat runs the foremost resource for all things 3D Whisker. Combine this with the constant reinforcement of real people being transferred into a fictional world, the implication seems pretty clear. Pat is Pat. Pat has done something horrible to her children, and for one reason or another, in some supernatural way, in the classically ambiguous Domenico fashion, she has imprisoned her problem child into the world of 3D Workers Island, a cartoon prison where they can't escape, where Pat can relax and enjoy her retirement while Amber is forced to endure violent abuse and trauma, as she did in life, forever, across thousands of simultaneous simulations. Hold on. Let's take a second. Is any of this actually true?
The narrative being communicated here seems so obvious, so clear, but let's take another step back. What do we actually know? Not what's implied or vaguely paralleled. What do we know for a fact, and where are we getting our information from? If we take a slightly closer look at the nature of the narrative itself, instead of taking the obvious implications at face value, it becomes clear we're dealing with almost entirely unreliable narrators. Good Kid's accusation is dramatic and feels narratively important, placed right at the end of the story, and his ban is followed immediately by Island Pat at the computer. But what do we know about Good Kid? Almost nothing, except for the fact that he's a high schooler who takes joy in morbid fabrications and gets into trouble at school. How can we trust this isn't just him fucking around, considering that is his only defining characteristic up to this point? If we don't take his word as fact, we're really only left with the loose implication that Pat and P. Lawler are similar, or at least that's how P. Lawler sees herself. On that note, we assume, because P. Lawler plants the idea early in the story, that Amber and Holland are Pat's children. But Amber doesn't look anything like Pat, only Holland does. Sure, you could go with the assumption that Amber is adopted or related in some other way, and that's fine, but that's more of a way to continue fitting this version of the narrative together instead of evidence to directly support it. P. Lawler is not a reliable narrator either. She is projecting her own life onto the characters of the screensaver in the same way almost every character we see seems to. Whoever authored the foreword of Inside 3D Whisker does it too, and is spelled out really clearly that this is the case when discussing this game they used to play with their brother. The curtains are closed, and we imagine our own childhood replaying itself behind them. It's just a stupid game, really, making up stories about the neighbor. I think of it as a way to bond over past experiences. Somehow we get emotional about it anyway, but not emotional enough to do anything, because of course, it's a stupid game. There's no point in worrying about those children based on feelings and intuition alone. They haven't outgrown this game at all. They've just moved it to the island, imposing the stories of their past experiences. That's not to say there is nothing going on in the screensaver at all, but we have to realize none of the characters throughout this story can be fully trusted. We see next to none of the rare sightings besides a low-quality JPEG of Amber tinted red and some red spheres with the text assuring us, yes, the red ball is Amber. But how do we actually know?
Analyzing 3D Workers Island, I think, requires a kind of postmodern lens, a questioning of the narrative itself and how we're being given the information. With that, all we are left with is what we see of 3D Whisker firsthand. And of course, we were able to piece together an entire story of torment and abuse for Amber with it before, but what do we actually see? An island with people walking around on it. Sure, we've interpreted some of their movements and interactions as specific things like rejection, crying, striking someone to the ground, leering imposingly above them, but do we actually know that that's what's happening? These are a series of images of characters that often do odd and unexplainable things. Why is Amber moving her arms more relevant than Holland holding a lamp or Joe floating in a chair? Is Pat hitting Amber, or is Amber just sitting down? Is Grace stewing in the guilt of what she's seen, or just staring off because she's a character designed to be an emo teen? I think the biggest hint to start questioning these assumptions is the PJR pin. After reading all about this supposedly rare but horrific sighting where the characters huddle around Amber, we cut straight to some of the characters huddled in a circle, and it brings to mind the story we just read. But it's not actually the PJR pin, it just looks vaguely similar. Nothing sinister is actually happening here, but because of the disturbing thing we've just read, it fills us with unease. And almost all of the implied harms or disturbing narratives we see function in a similar way, either cutting straight from some seemingly meaningful or unnerving story to something which seems to evoke that perception, or showing an interaction that in retrospect takes on a kind of eerie implication. Pat at the computer after she's described as omniscient on the boards. Amber flailing her arms seems like a deeply sad reaction after hearing about her tormented existence. Rebecca and Pat glitching into each other after hearing about violent or graphic visuals. But on their own, the things we see on the island don't really hold that same kind of weight without this carefully crafted context.
And don't get me wrong, this story and these implications are completely and entirely intentional on the part of Tony Domenico. He wants you to make these connections. As the author, he is presenting these things together in order for you to take this narrative from what he shows you. But I also think there are breadcrumbs being left that leave enough doubt, enough room to encourage us to question this narrative. And I don't think it's as simple as a switcheroo or a gotcha, a parlor trick to tell the reader, haha, you thought the story I created with authorial intent and a narrative actually meant something, but it was all a ruse. The twist was that nothing was happening at all. No. It is far from that. Our deconstructing of the narrative is only the first step, deeper into the story that is being told. In my mind, the reason this story is asking you first to come away believing this dark, creepypasta adjacent tale, and then asking you to question it, is because the entire project in some way or another is about confirmation bias, projection, escapism, and how we process our own personal narratives and stories.
The island works as a blank slate, characters with no faces, no confirmed relationships or personalities. We don't even know who made it or how it works. It is completely contextless. We see these characters interact dynamically and are left to interpret what these interactions are and mean. And so, we see the community project their own stories and lives onto them. Pat does it with herself and her kids, connecting with Pat and criticizing Amber's imagined lazy tendencies because of her own view of children needing to do work. Despite all the evidence, we actually see that Amber does often engage in various chores around the island. Pat is retired, and much like the other user with her mother, finds 3D Workers Island an escape, a thing to keep her mind occupied. Meanwhile, the people on Inside 3D Whisker are clearly in more difficult situations, dealing with mental health issues, chronic illness, or physical disability. And again, it's made very explicit that they use their time making up stories to bond about past experiences, vicariously reliving their childhoods, worried about the kids on the other side that are, in the end, projections of themselves. Has anyone actually seen any of these anomalous events? Are they taking the word of other users because it reinforces their narrative, or have they actually seen things they can't explain? Whether those things are actually there or not. And does it matter one way or the other to them if they have? Miss Toothpaste says pretty clearly, people like her cousin are finding real meaning in these stories, whether they're making them up on the spot or not.
And we, as the viewer, using the context of what we've seen in our lives, our experience with creepypasta tropes, and what we've read from the other users, project our own narrative onto what we see as well. That story isn't no longer meaningful just because it came from us, but it is our story.
The Screensaver is a canvas, a blank series of interactions and events that people project their own meaning and stories onto, and as a result, those stories and actions in the Screensaver become meaningful. It develops into a reflection of their reality, and so what the characters do becomes important to them. In turn, the viewer's real lives are influenced by the virtual, the actions on the screen. It's a two-way street.
This connection of reality and fiction is why I think it was important for the story to be a more postmodern work, so that we could experience this projection and reflection firsthand. We consistently see this concept reinforced thematically as well, with the allusions to a merging with or falling into fictions, from the Pagemaster reference to the bizarre computer philosophy article. It's also clear from these examples that there is a darker side to falling down this rabbit hole.
We see how users can spiral into obsession, derealization. Almost everyone we encounter in the story has some level of an arguably unhealthy fascination with the Screensaver, treating it with an almost religious reverence and feeling threatened when their story, their interpretation is questioned or imposed on by another. They've entangled their own lives so thoroughly with this virtual one that the line between their lives and the Screensaver begins to blur.
To a lesser extent, I've seen this become true within the real-life theory community surrounding this project since its release. Some people feel attached enough to the emotional core of Amber's story that when it's suggested by others that there might be nothing really going on, that it's a subversion, much like my interpretation here, they seem genuinely disconcerted at the idea that someone could be dismissing Amber's experiences, assertively casting these ideas aside because it just wouldn't be right. Obviously, I'm not implying these people are like losing their marbles and think it's all real, but I think it goes to show that it is in human nature to connect with these stories so deeply we feel protective of them.
Back to the story itself, I think the key to understanding this kind of virtual escapism and merging of realities lies within the computer philosophy article. Though at first seemingly incoherent, taking a moment to try to understand the author here line by line and cleaning up the grammar a little bit, some of the messages become rather clear. The only real window of reality is the one we looked into as a baby and still cannot turn from. Of course, the TV screen is really a window into fiction and not reality. We bring the inside into the outside, and the outside is the place we are stuck looking. This is the only meaning of "I'm trapped in the TV," when we find out that reality is the thing we look into. What happens when something bad you feel responsible for is there, and you do nothing to stop it, because it looks through a window and is not real?
It's hard not to see these statements as a discussion of virtual escapism. The only real window of reality is the one we experience through our senses, the one we cannot turn from because, well, our sense organs and brain are in our head. It's the reality we've experienced since we were born. But there are other windows into other realities we can see, such as the virtual ones in our screen. And these can become so real to us that we take the feelings and experiences we draw from them into our real lives, bring the inside into the outside. And we feel the fear and sadness just as we would in our own reality, but are unable to affect it in the same way, unable to change its course. Something bad happens, and you do nothing to stop it, because it is not real. We see this in the users of Inside 3D Whisker experiencing this horrific story that they feel so personally, so real, and yet they're stuck, unable to intervene, to help Amber.
So, as these characters fall deeper and deeper into their projections, stories, they're peering through that screen, becoming more and more real to them, we can see how it places them, even traps them, in that window, in that virtual reality. The only meaning of "I'm trapped in the TV." In the end, where does that rabbit hole lead us? This is where we finally have to take a look at the ending.
One of the most mysterious and hard to crack elements of 3D Workers Island has been its ending. What does that final imagery mean? How does its allusion to the skin disease and worker compression connect together? I think it comes into focus if we view the progression of Cutilacune as a parallel to the narrative progression of the story. Let me explain.
In Cutilacune, the once continuous form of the skin is broken into islands, which eventually become smaller and smaller until they disappear. The chapter names of 3D Workers Island imply a similar progression, shrinking from a world to an island to the final recession of those islands. Visually, we see this occur too. The red balls shrinking below the surface, the island itself getting smaller and smaller in our window, then into dozens of disconnected windows, finally disappearing. If we understand each instance of 3D Workers Island, each viewer projection as its own window, a unique reality, the meaning of this recession begins to take form. As people, we begin with a shared single reality, the one which we cannot turn away from. But as we fall further into the rabbit hole of 3D Workers Island, the specific reality we create and all the other users create become more specific, less unanimous, and we break apart into our own smaller windows, smaller realities, smaller islands. This idea that each instance of the screensaver is a smaller window in itself is reinforced by the near final shot where we see dozens of windows of the screensaver at once. Additionally, the idea that worker degeneration is analogous to a sinking into fiction is demonstrated with the inclusion of the Snopes graphic that appears earlier, indicating a red sphere is representative of a falsehood. Add to that the same image's use of red and green icons together indicating multiple truth values, and a very similar visual at the bottom of the computer philosophy page showcasing them leaving the screen, it seems to be again reinforcing the idea of multiple realities, multiple truths which come from the screen and we bring out into our own personal experience of reality. And as we escape further and further into that fiction, our descent accelerates, our connection to the shared reality becomes smaller, and our isolation on our own island increases, our experience more niche, more specific. The more I watch, the more I notice. If I have someone in the room with me, they don't happen. And as we fall into this, it becomes more and more difficult to discern our reality. The fiction feels more real. We both find that our dreams become more vivid with time, and it becomes more difficult to bear it on our own. This is further paralleled with the concept of worker degeneration. The agony of slowly losing touch with others, of your reality becoming smaller and smaller, compressing further and further until we reach some kind of singularity. We are completely disconnected from others. Is this death is this insanity, whatever it is, it's the end of our experience of reality as we know it. Our window has minimized into non-existence.
This is all, of course, just my personal take on the story. Though I feel pretty confident in my more postmodern angle here, questioning the validity of the more straightforward narrative, I'll admit that as we get further into the specifics and ending, things definitely start to become a little shakier. And all of the connections I've made could just as easily be dismissed on the basis I dismissed the more straightforward narrative. They're just illusions and parallels. But I'm fairly happy with this as an attempt at a cohesive analysis. And there are a lot of notes and connections that I made that I didn't bring up in the analysis for clarity's sake. The star emblem reflecting the door and the Earth icon appearing on the laptop, and what looks like the computer philosophy article appearing on that laptop screen earlier as well. Pat and Rebecca glitching, and Pat maybe having a thing for Rebecca. The fact that the house is windowless, implying either a hidden reality or no existing reality within the house at all. And honestly, you could interpret the connections of worker degeneration, the Snopes article imagery, and the computer philosophy imagery 1,000 different ways. There is a lot packed into this project, and I think it's pretty clearly doing multiple things at once. The idea that there are multiple truth values to the story itself is pretty apt. I haven't even really touched on the more meta commentary of creepypasta itself. When you really look at it, the stories of Amber's hyper-realistic face and human screams in the screensaver are so obviously creepypasta tropes, and you could totally view the entire story as an examination of forum culture and internet creepypasta from the 90s and 2000s. Or how Pat discusses the users making theories about scary stories and running with them as fact, and viewers finding real meaning in the fiction or made-up tales they conjure from theorizing about this piece of media, all of which could be seen as a reflection of Tony's experience with the reaction and community around Petscop, and maybe what the community reaction to this project will be. Or the fact that the Inside 3D Whisker author literally calls his website a game, which you could totally interpret as it being an actual ARG, unfiction community that just doesn't want to break character in an obvious way. You could read the whole story as a lot like the film We're All Going to the World's Fair, as an examination of when unfiction communities and the wider internet interact, and how that line of what's real and who actually knows it's a game is blurred. And despite the fact that I think we'd be missing a big chunk of what this story has to offer if we ignored this unreliable narrator angle, the narrative around Amber is clearly intentional and has real merit to discuss and dissect on its own. Even if you take my interpretation as fact, the story goes out of its way to highlight that even a fictional story can have real emotional significance and meaning. There is just so much to dig into with this project, despite being significantly smaller in scope than Petscop, so I would highly encourage you all to go read it for yourself. This video is in no way a definitive understanding of the story, and there are bits and pieces that I didn't cover here, so I'd absolutely love to hear all of your thoughts and analysis in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to Pressed Yes, aka Mr. Yes, aka Tony Domenico, for creating such wonderfully mysterious and idiosyncratic pieces of art over the years. If you'd all like to support me, you can check out my Patreon, where I have a ton of cool perks starting at only $2 a month. It really helps me pay for all the production that goes into these videos, like this CRT here. And all the music for all the videos I make is available to download on my Patreon for free. You don't even need to become a member. Speaking of music, the soundtrack for this video should be out on streaming by now, and if not, it will be very soon. Shout out to my dad for letting me use one of his songs for the title sequence. Stream Lucas now. Otherwise, I'll see you all next time.
Shadow Man, Shadow Man, you've given up the ghost, given up